first glance, Utah is a beautiful place. It has flowing streams, beautiful lakes, multiple forests, and those huge rock formations you see in movies. But Utah is only beautiful in pictures that you can view while you are far away. All of Utah's beauty only hides the true evil that lurks in its forest, drinks from its lakes and streams, and hides its victims in caves. To fully understand how this story took place, you have to know something about the people involved in the story. The Navajo live in the Four Corners region of Utah, New Mexico, Arizona, and Colorado. Whether creatures like this lurk in those states, I do not know. They probably are in Colorado. Colorado has all the weird things in it. Anyway, the Navajo in Utah are the ones that were involved in this. With Navajo people come all the legends and monsters of Navajo culture. Wendigo and skinwalkers are probably the first to come to mind. The Navajo play a large part in this story and a large part in my survival. You're probably wondering who I am by now. My name is Dr. Kim Newman. I have a PhD in zoology and a bachelor's degree in biology. I went to Utah in hopes of studying the cryptids that the natives say live here. And you're probably also wondering how I got involved in this trip to Utah. Well, I'll be honest. I got involved because of the internet. I'm what you call a freelance zoologist. I study whatever people pay me to study. I wish I had chosen a different line of work. Some rich guy from California wanted me to take his son on a cryptid hunting trip for his birthday. My skepticism made me turn down his offer at first until I saw the number of zeros on the check that he handed me. The money persuaded my mind to think that I would enjoy an uneventful 2-week camping trip in Utah and come back home unscathed with plenty of money to retire on. I only wish it had turned out that way. A week later, I found myself on an old Douglas DC-3, loaded down with scientific equipment. 14 of the DC-3's original 21 seats had been removed to make room for the various supplies in the back. We had night vision and infrared cameras, sound reading equipment, multiple large tents, food and clothing for the 2 weeks, and some things in black cases that I had not seen opened. I had brought equipment to harvest blood, hair, and skin for testing back at my mobile lab that would be brought on a second plane. All 7 available seats for passengers were filled up. I was sitting in the first row with the rich kid, Steve, sitting beside me. Across the aisle from us was Keith, a huge bear of a man. Keith was at least 6 foot 8 inches tall and probably weighed 450 pounds. He spoke with a deep, booming voice, although he probably wouldn't hurt a fly. The other 5 guys were hired men that Steve had brought with him. All of them big and looked like they ate nails for breakfast. Steve had explained that they were there for security and to help us set up all the equipment. I just laughed. Security from what? We landed at a small dirt strip in the middle of a village on the borders of Sawtooth National Forest. Several Navajo men came out to greet us. One of the men, who I would come to know as David, stepped forward. "Hello, how are you today?" David asked. "We're very glad to be on the ground," Steve replied. David laughed and pointed to a group of houses. The buildings I saw weren't exactly houses, though. A more apt description would be large log cabins. If anything happens while you are out in the woods, run to the cabins. The cabins are the only safe zone in this forest, David said with a grimace. I couldn't understand why he said this. There was no way this creature existed, right? With a wave and a good luck, David walked back to his cabin. I developed a sick feeling in my stomach while thinking about his words. What if I was wrong? What if we didn't make it out of the forest? I brushed these thoughts off and I walked over to Steve. He looked over at me and he swallowed. You don't think it's actually real, do you? He asked. I don't know, Steve. I'm scared to imagine that it does, I replied. Steve shook his head and walked off towards the rest of the group. I turned to the plane and I saw Keith packing the black cases off the loading dock. He looked at me and gestured to the cases. It's the various things I need to set up my rifle, he explained. He set the cases down and he opened them. One case contained magazines full of 50 cal BMG ammunition. The other cases contained various accessories like a bipod and a scope. The final case contained a field-stripped Barrett M82. Even this behemoth of a rifle looked small compared to Keith. I figure no creature in this world could stand up to a shot from this. I'll be carrying this on our expedition, Keith said. With the grace of a ballet dancer, Keith reached down and he picked up the cases. When I turned back to the plane, I noticed that the villagers had already unloaded all of our gear and stacked it near the now set up tents. I walked over to the tents and I searched for the ones containing my bunk and the rest of my stuff. I sat on my bed with a book and I began reading, eventually falling asleep. I was woken up by the sounds of low growling outside my tent. The growling seemed to circle the tent as whatever it was searched for the entrance. I turned to Keith's bunk, only to see him already crouching near the entrance with a large handgun. He turned back to me and he put his hand on his lips. Now was not the time to scream or move. Now was the time to pray silently to God or whoever you believe in to save us from whatever was outside of the tent. Keith slowly leaned out of the tent and screamed. Seeing this bear of a man scream prompted me to scream and unfortunately wet the front of my pants. Keith fell to the ground and rolled in laughter. Steve walked in a few seconds later, holding his phone and a small Bluetooth speaker that was lightly playing bear sounds. If you could have seen the look on your face, Steve wheezed between laughs. Haha, very funny, I pouted, as I walked over to my suitcase full of clothes. Go outside the tent so I can change, since you decided to be childish. Keith and Steve walked out of the tent, still laughing and wheezing. I opened my suitcase and I grabbed another pair of underwear and another pair of pajama pants. I brought them over to my bed and proceeded to wipe my crotch and legs off with some wet wipes that I had brought with me. After getting dressed and laying down in bed again, I drifted back to sleep. I woke up the next morning to Keith in a giant apron standing over me. He was waving a plate of biscuits with gravy, eggs, bacon, and sausage in front of my face. Keith, as good as that smells, I'm sleepy and it would ruin my diet, I grumbled sleepily. Oh, come on, Miss Kim. You're in good shape. You can afford a cheat day, he said cheerily. I took the plate from him, ignoring his comment. He watched with a hopeful look on his face as I ate the eggs and then quickly devoured the rest of the plate. He looked happy as I licked the plate clean. Was it good? He asked. That was the best breakfast I've ever had. My grandma can't even cook that good, I told him. Steve smiled and showed me a small homemade badge. It read, Best Chef in the World. After my wife passed away from cancer, my daughter asked if I would take cooking classes with her. She made this after I passed the beginner cooking classes, he said. I'm so sorry, I said, my face down. It's fine. She's not in pain anymore, you know, he said, a small smile on his face. How old is your daughter? I asked. She was 3 when my wife passed. She's 8 now, he answered. My emotions got the best of me and I found myself wrapping him in a hug. He chuckled and he hugged me back. All I could think is how brave but stupid this man was. He was all his daughter had left and he was out here in the woods with wild animals, "Keith, you really shouldn't be here. You should be at home with your daughter," I said. "Nah, I'll be fine. My fee for this trip will get Abby a pony for her birthday, and put her through college," Keith replied with a laugh. "But there are 5 other guys that can protect Steve. Why do they need you when you have a daughter at home?" I asked, angry that Steve and his father could be so insensitive. "I'm not here to protect Steve. I'm here to protect you," Keith said, rising from the bed and taking my plate. He smiled and he walked out of the tent. I sat in disbelief. Who would send Keith to protect me? What is really going on here? We went out into the forest that night. We started placing the night vision cameras on game trails and near sources of the water. We set the infrared cameras near the huge tent that we had set up in a clearing. We set one of the very sensitive microphones near each of the night vision cameras in the hopes that we would catch some bit of audio that we could use for later identification. I noticed Keith and Steve lingered around a rack filled with guns and flares. It made good sense to be near weapons if this creature did exist. Just as I was about to walk over to them, a scream erupted from the tent. I ran inside to find one of the men running the cameras shaking in fear. "What happened?" I asked, concerned. "Something big ran up to one of the cameras and it smashed it," he said, his voice shaking. I turned my attention to the screen the cameras were connected to. One by one, the displays went out and static appeared. Each camera in a sequence, growing closer and closer to our camp. I heard a clicking sound and looked up to see Keith loading his rifle. He turned to me with a grim look on his face. "Stay in the tent. Do not leave the tent. Liam will stay with you and protect you," he ordered. Liam was the guy running the computer. He reached into a cabinet near him and pulled out 2 rifles and a couple of mags for each. He handed me one of the rifles and explained the process for loading and firing it. Keith ran off into the woods. Silence fell over the woods. The mic stopped recording. Crickets stopped chirping. Everyone in camp held their breath. A shrill scream erupted from the woods. Keith came running back into camp, a look of terror on his face. Something stumbled into the clearing behind him. All of the pictures on the internet and all of the stories on Reddit could not have prepared me for what I saw. The creature was skeletal, almost withered away. A deer skull sat atop the bone that served as its neck. On its fingers grew claws 12 inches in length. The creature itself grew 3 feet above Keith's head. Keith dove for the ground and rolled, aiming his rifle at the creature. He fired 3 rounds as fast as the gun could fire into the creature's chest. The creature screamed and grabbed the rifle from Keith's hand, snapping it like a twig. It looked up and it made eye contact with me, as it grabbed his ankle and dragged him into the woods. As soon as Keith and the creature disappeared, Liam scooped me up in his arms and ran with me back to the cabins, despite my protest. Once we were safe inside the cabins, David calmly and solemnly told me that Keith would not be coming back. David asked if I would like to be the one to tell his daughter. I sat in the chair, traumatized at the look on his face as the creature dragged him. Traumatized by the look the creature gave me, and Keith as it dragged him away. Traumatized by having to tell his daughter, who had already lost one parent, that her daddy, the best chef in the world, would not be returning home. Keith's daughter flew to the camp the next day, with the knowledge that something had happened to her dad. Her aunt accompanied her as they walked towards the cabin that I was in. Abby sat down in the chair in front of me and cried as I told her that her dad died a hero. She clung to her aunt's neck as I explained that he charged right towards a wild animal and he saved us from it. I hugged Abby and told her that she was brave as a shout came from the other side of the village. I looked in horror as a tall creature covered in mud and blood staggered into the village, dragging a deer skull and a neck bone behind it. As it drew closer, however, I realized the creature was Keith. The Navajo in the village rushed to his aid, cleaning his wounds and washing the mud off. Keith had been dragged into the woods by the Wendigo that had plagued this village for years. As it dragged him through mud and leaves, Keith grabbed a branch and stabbed it through the torso. It slashed his stomach with its claws as he grabbed its antlers and pulled it until its neck separated from its body. He watched as the giant creature fell to his knees and lied still in the dirt. The Navajo hailed him as a hero and gave him a handmade knife from one of the legs that they had found of the creature. They clothed him in buckskin cloths and told all the village children this was the man that had saved them all. After a celebration that lasted most of the day, they brought out a final present. It was a mare for Abby, draped in a beautiful handmade blanket and saddle. Keith and I started dating that day and married 3 years later. I gave birth to his child a year after our wedding. Abby is the perfect daughter and calls me mom. But all this happiness is tainted by one warning given by the Navajo. Wendigo remember their fallen the way that we do. Fear the dark and fear the forest. Hey everyone, my name is Cody and I just graduated from a high school in New Mexico. My best friend JR and I are about to start college at the same place, but we start pretty late. All of our other friends have left, so the two of us have done nothing but get in trouble the last month or so. It's not our fault that there's literally nothing to do in our tiny piece of shit town. You can only mess with cows and eat northern neighbor brownies, so it gets old quickly. Last night, JR and I were hanging out. Midnight rolled around and we both were bored as bricks. We were both browsing Reddit and JR came across r/Urbex. We had been breaking into abandoned places for years now, but he was psyched that there was a name for it that sounded way less illegal. He jumped off the couch. We ain't doing shit, man. Let's go find someplace to explore. JR, it's literally past midnight and I don't want to do anything but sleep. He slapped me in the chest and he yelled, "Vamonos!" over his shoulder as he grabbed the keys out of the bowl near the sink. He tossed the keys to the white 2007 Toyota Tacoma, and we set out on the dirt roads looking for a place. I had a huge backlog of places that I wanted to see from all the time I spent running through the hills with the cross-country team, so I knew exactly where I wanted to go. I had seen this large metallic building hundreds of times, but never up close. I took the main road, named after some settler of the West, for about 10 minutes, before throwing a right onto a residential dirt road. I heard JR yell, "A la verga," as he smashed into the passenger window. "Where are we going?" "You remember the metal buildings we'd always see running the fire line?" "Oh yeah. Okay." JR always tries to be so macho, but I knew that he was excited. One of the best parts about being on that team with him was seeing the freshmen who joined the team each year. We got to watch them gawk at those metal buildings and told them the same stories we were told when we joined. We drove until the residential road turned, well, not residential. We got to the end of the graded part and the road turned into some deep ruts. We drove on, bouncing back and forth, while JR was listening to the radio. The road was severely overgrown, but it looked like someone had been up there as recently as last night. The soft ground had some pretty distinct marks even in the middle of the night. We parked about half a mile away and walked over a cattle guard flanked with signs that read, "Do not enter," and Government Research Facility. I knew something was wrong when I saw that the light was illuminating one of the front doors. I had run by this place literally hundreds of times, and I had never seen even the most remote sign of life. JR and I exchanged puzzled glances as we stepped forward. I felt a weed brush my leg. I looked down and the dim moonlight revealed the disturbed ground. Someone had cleared the place of weeds, and recently too. We finally got to the fence. It was chain link but tipped with razor wire. The razor wire was new, but the fence itself was old and rusted. We walked the perimeter until we found an old acequia that left a big gap enough to squeeze under. We jumped out of the ditch and took a couple more steps until we were out of the acequia and had moved away from the pecan trees that circled the building near the fence. We looked again at the single bare bulb that gave off the soft light. JR waved to grab my attention. He whispered, "It looks like someone is there. Where's his car at though? Let's check around the back." We moved slowly through the sagebrush to the side of the building. In the glow of a couple yellow lights, I saw two trucks covered in mud. The first looked like a relatively new F-350, while the second was a Tacoma like we had drove. We were circling toward the beds of the trucks when the back door creaked open. We dropped to the ground and peered through the gaps of the truck. A man dressed in white stepped out and sparked a cigarette. We laid silently in the dust as he smoked the cigarette to the filter. After what seemed like a century, he dropped it and gave one stomp with his heel. The door creaked back closed behind him. JR jumped up and sprinted to the door in an attempt to catch it before it latched. I followed as quietly as I could and I laughed as he cursed at the door. JR turned to face me. In the dim light, I could see that his eyes were wide open. He pressed a finger to his lips and an ear to the door. I heard him gasp and jerk his head away. "What is it?" "Just listen, man." I moved forward, pressing my cheek and ear to the cold metal door. I heard screams, not just a scream. Screams overlapping other screams, silhouetted against the background and pleading. I pulled away from the door and I met JR's eyes. The happy adrenaline from before was immediately replaced with an emptiness in my stomach. We now circled around to the back of the building where a window cast out a dim glow. We couldn't resist. We looked in. I won't go into full detail, but what you need to know is that there is blood. A lot of it. It sat in the sink and on the metal table and on the floor. It was sprayed across the plastic curtain and on the walls. There was no body, but it looked like more blood than any one person could possess. We sprinted away without looking back. We didn't even say a word or stop until we were off that godforsaken road and in the comfort of our houses. I pulled over and I grabbed my phone to call the police. "What are you doing?" "I'm calling 911. "No, we're gonna be the ones that are in trouble. We both saw those signs." "It doesn't matter. What we saw back there is messed up and we have to tell someone." I called the police and I did my best to explain what had happened. I have an appointment with Detective Gallegos tomorrow. He told me that at this time, he couldn't substantiate any of my claims. I'm going back tomorrow to get pictures. I need actual proof to show everybody what's happening. Detective Gallegos wanted to interview JR and me separately. I texted JR and we established that her story would be that we got lost while looking for some local hot springs. I got to the police station around 10 a.m. and I met with Gallegos at 11. He was an older dude, like way too old to be a functioning officer. But something he said during the interview didn't make any sense. If you'll recall, JR and I left his house around midnight, and I must have got to the building around 1 a.m. That means by the time we got everything and called the police, it could have been no later than 3 a.m. Gallegos told me that he had received our call at 5:30 a.m., and he had searched the place by 6. I know his old ass must be covering for their shitty response time. I was nervous, but he seemed to buy my story. He said he would call me back if there were any more questions. No words from them for the rest of the day. After that, I went home and I crashed until about 2 in the afternoon. I then set out to get some actual pictures of the place. JR didn't answer his phone, so I guess I was flying solo. I'm going to recount each picture one by one to show you what's happening. First is a photo of the entrance. I was actually super confident at this point that things were going to go off without a hitch. In the photo is the do not enter sign and a sign about government property. Underneath looks like a US Forest Service logo, but I'm not 100% sure. Keep in mind this is a good mile away from any kind of life. After driving a ways, I parked and I walked. This is the first glimpse of the area that I saw. There are 2 RVs inside the fence that I hadn't noticed before. They looked a little beat to shit, but all the walls were still intact. I checked for any signs of life as I got closer. Here's a better picture once I did. JR and I got in basically directly across from where I took this photo. Also in this picture you can see the door he stepped out of. I blew it up a little just so you guys could see. I circled around to where JR and I got in and noticed something really weird. This was the thing outside of the fence but near a gate that looked like a silo. When I got closer, oh my god, it smelled so bad. I took pictures and I got the hell away. Here's another one. It says that it was inspected, but there is a giant hole in the top, so I highly doubt it. I yanked the life out of that handle, but it wouldn't even move though I didn't see any locks on the outside. I had half a mind to try and see the hole, but that smell had me on the verge of puking as it was. I stepped away from the silo and I turned around to face the clearing behind me. That is when I knew that I had made a mistake. Standing on the tree line was a man with a bandana over his face. I didn't hesitate for a second and I tore ass back to my car. I jumped in and I threw that shit in reverse as fast as humanly possible. I don't know where his car was, but I saw him in the rearview following me. Here's a pretty bad picture. It never got closer than that, but I think that it was a green or a purple van. I don't think he could have seen my license plate or anything. To be safe though, I didn't go home. Instead I went to the gym and I stayed there for a few hours. I thought that I had gotten away fine. At my house, I have one of those choppy wooden clip things attached to the door so people can leave like mail and stuff. I was unlocking the door and I looked up to see this hanging from it. I'm starting to think that I really messed up. JR won't answer any of my calls or texts, and I know that that mouse didn't end up on my door on accident. I'm leaving at the end of this week and I'm just trying to see it through till then. I'm scared.